everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Stone Genius Podcast. My name is Ro. You know me. I'm the Stone Genius. I'm often stoned. I'm always a genius. Once again, the caveat is don't ask my wife if I'm always a genius because she will definitely say no. But that I have paperwork that says otherwise. Hey, we have a very special guest today. And this is kind of cool because for the longtime listeners to this, the original listeners to this podcast, this started as a sports podcast. And then it migrated into something totally different. And I know some of you are still around from that time. So we may get to talk a lot about sports on today's program. I have a very special guest. She was a pioneer in broadcasting. She is a writer and an author. She had a career as an amateur sports official. We're going to get to all that and then some other things as well. Annie Montgomery, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Ro. I'm glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you on this. Like I said, it's funny. I think on some platforms, the description is still a sports podcast, even though it's called the Stone Genius. Because this started talking Tampa Bay sports. It was just a side thing that I did, and then sports was hard for me to talk about, especially when I was only talking Tampa sports. So let me ask you, what is your background? Explain to our audience a little bit about who you are, Annie Montgomery.
As far as my background in sports goes, I was rather the freak back in the 1970s when my mother stepped up to me and said, "So you have to go to college. What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I went, "A sportscaster." I was 17. It was 1972. And my mother looked at me and said, "Don't be ridiculous. I want to have a serious conversation."
Were there any female sportscasters?
No.
Okay. I mean,
not.
I felt like when I was born in 67, and I felt like in the 80s, that's when some of that was when it was starting to change. So I didn't know if I just wasn't aware in the 70s. So you're saying when you decided you wanted to go off to college and you needed something to do, you wanted to do something no one else was currently doing.
There were women who were trying to become sports writers back then. But, really, Phyllis George, Miss America, was the woman standing on the sidelines in her fur coat, interviewing the coaches' wives. One of the networks hired her to pretend. I'm not dissing her; it's not her fault. But she didn't know anything about sports. She was Miss America, and that's kind of.
Well, I just wanted to jump in there. I think that was one of the things that was very difficult is when they tried to. I remember when they were trying to introduce women into sports broadcasting, that it seemed like they had a lack of knowledge. That it was more because of the way that they looked that they were being put on the air.
Of course.
Yes.
That's been that way. It's still that way to a certain extent. Now, I'm going to put a caveat here. There were, of course, women like Olympic athletes, like Peggy Fleming, who won gold medals in the Olympic Games. Yes, she could talk about ice skating, or a tennis player could talk about tennis. So there were women that could be discovering sports, but they were sports they performed in or competed in. So I'm not talking about them. That's a whole different thing. To me, a sportscaster is someone who covers, the main team spectator sports, football, baseball, ice hockey, soccer, basketball, those kinds of things. And I was an ice skater growing up of no great talent. I was an ice dancer. And when I was young, I thought I was going to be in the Olympics, but I had no talent and I was way too big. So, I mean, if you've ever seen ice dancers, the women are like 5 foot nothing and weigh 80 pounds. And trust
where
me,
where did you grow up that you...
New Jersey.
New Jersey. Okay.
Northern New Jersey, right outside of New York City.
So being a Florida boy and my parents at a young age dropping me off at the ice rink and going, just go get skates and do it. I was an adult before I learned that ice skates size smaller than your shoes.
Oh, absolutely.
I didn't fucking, and I hated ice skating because I always had blisters because I was going in and I wore whatever size shoe and that's what I would get. And then when I started getting into hockey, I was like, oh, I should skate again. I went in and they're like, I was with someone and I got my shoe size and they're like, what are you doing? Like I was the dumbest person.
And that's called child abuse because when you got new skates, you get them without blades when they're new, and you have to get them all wet and walk around in them wet so they will mold to your foot. and it's abusive. It's like foot binding in China. It was terrible. And then when you finally got them all nice and comfortable, you had to get new ones because they were too loose. And honestly, they have to be really tight. And when people go, I can't skate because my ankles are weak. I'm like, you don't even, your ankles don't move at all. It's like they're
Right.
in concrete. So the idea was I grew up in an arena. My dad took me to skate when I was 5 for the first time, and I skated for another 20 years. I also did hockey. I was a hockey referee later, so I understand the hockey skate thing. But yeah, I grew up in an arena, and so ice hockey was my first favorite team sport. Today, I would play hockey. But in the 1970s, you think anybody was going to let me play hockey? Hell no. So I was an ice dancer, and what did that do for me? That gave me that feeling of being an athlete, that I want to have a gold medal, or kid wants to play in the NFL or the NBA. That was instilled in me early, even though I had no talent. You know how when you're a kid, y'all think you're going to be a
Right.
professional athlete. Well, that was never going to happen. But in my brain, I got that competitive spirit, and that, I enjoyed that. So, and then when I was in high school, it was very strange. We had a broadcast crew, so people did sports. Kids did announcements. We had music, kind of like your show. You have sound effects, and every morning we read announcements. And one day I went up to the basket where all the announcements were, and I picked out all the sports stories, because a hockey player had handed me an announcement that said, "Would you put this in the basket so we can have an announcement this morning?" And I decided to take all the sports stories. You would have thought I robbed a bank. All the guys started screaming at me, "You can't do sports. You're a girl," right? And so the teacher who ran the broadcast crew came in and said, "We have a show in 10 minutes. If anyone wants to read the sports, you can read the sports." And I did. And the guys were so pissed. And the next day I came in and I grabbed all the sports stories again. And so they decided to give me theme music. And the theme music was, before I went on, they played Mission Impossible, dun, dun, dun,
Right.
dun, that thing. And then they decided to call me Big Ann with the sports. Now, they did this to humiliate me, but I thought it was cool. And so after that, everybody, all the coaches and players, everybody kept giving me the announcements. So I became the sportscaster in my school. And it even says that on my high school picture. This is your local sportscaster. And honestly, there weren't any. So when my mother asked, it just seemed totally normal to me to say that's what I want to be. Of course, getting there at that point was ridiculous. Even my college professor said, "You can't be a sportscaster. You're a girl." It went on and on. I didn't get my first job till I was 28.
Let me stop real quick and just ask about high school. As you're saying that you're the sportscaster, the sports report. How much of it? Because that first one you said that they were given like a hockey note or whatever. You talk about the box score, whatever they were doing. At what point did you start going out and soliciting your own stories or searching your own story?
None. Okay, it wasn't like today where
Okay.
kids in high school have TV shows. Like, I taught in a high school, and they have a radio station, newspaper, and they do all actual journalism. It wasn't like that. People came to me and said, "We want you to read this announcement about how the game went last night, or this announcement that we're gonna, we want players to come in and we got tryouts." So it was just kind of, it wasn't actual journalism yet.
Okay.
It was just me keeping, announcements had to be made, and I kept stealing all the sports stories, and the guys got put down by the teacher, and so I became that person in school.
What was the
And it was
most
fun.
enjoyable part about doing that, except for showing the guys up? But what was the most enjoyable part of that? Because it was sports, and even though you grew up in an arena and you had an introduction to it sounds like many different sports. What made that your focus, sports, as opposed to because I know that you have written, you've written for sports, you've written features, you've written movie reviews, different things like that. So I know you've written other pieces, but what caused you in high school to say sports? Is it the limited field that you had? What made you make that decision?
Oh, well, probably a couple of things. One, I liked boys. And there were a lot of boys who played sports. Mostly in my time, girls didn't play sports very much. And I totally enjoyed being around whole teams of guys. I didn't admit that for a long time, but that was true. Secondly, and this doesn't exactly answer your question, but I learned very quickly that there wasn't a microphone I didn't like. I
Yeah.
l- I like performing. I like being in front of people. I did a lot of acting. I was in about a dozen plays. So I like performing. And that believe, I know sports guys don't like to say that, or news anchors don't like to say that, but we are performers to a certain extent. And so I enjoyed getting on that microphone. And honestly, I didn't want to talk about serious things. I like talking about sports. So
Yeah,
for
and
the
you know,
first
as you were saying that, I was thinking in the '70s and '80s and even the '90s. I've mentioned Seinfeld used to have a bit about uh, public speaking was the number one fear of people. Death was number two. So if you were at a
right,
funeral, you'd rather be in
still
front of.
is.
Yeah, and so I think that is because you do have to. Like, I'm not afraid. It's weird because like I will get nervous on a one-on-one, just like butterflies. So I still do my pregame. I listen to music. I have energy I need to get out before you and I talk for the first time. But if someone gives me a microphone and wants me to sing karaoke in front of 10 people or 100 people or speak in front of thousands of people, which I've done before, that I don't mind that at all. Because I'm like you. I enjoy the microphone. I've always said this. I'm 6'5". There's a certain amount of there's an energy when I enter the room. So I
Of
always feel
course.
like people know I'm there. So if people are gonna know I'm there, let me not necessarily give them a show, but let's enjoy each other while I'm there, kind of. And
Well,
so
I'm,
if that
I'm going to
means taking the mic and doing whatever, I'll do it.
Yeah, I'm, it's funny. I'm an author, and many authors shun public speaking. They don't like that. And I'm like, give me the friggin' microphone. I'm happy to go out and talk about things. But you mentioned butterflies and being nervous. Um, I mentioned to you before, I was on live TV maybe 2,000 times as a broadcaster. And quite honestly, I was nervous every single time. Every single time I walked on stage, I was nervous. Every single time I went up to sing karaoke, which I've done, I'm nervous. But once I start, I'm good. And I think being nervous helps you. I think it's kind of a gift in a way that it's making you focus.
Yeah.
That's just my theory. I don't know.
Yeah, and I would agree to that point, and that's where I've kind of treated it because I found it very similar to when I used to compete in sports. Is that it would be the same type of nervous energy, and
Yes,
I just have to
exactly.
go through a process to kind of just deal with that because too much energy is not good. You know, lack of energy is not good as well, but neither one of those. So you'd mentioned that you didn't your first professional job was this in sportscasting at 28 that you got your first or your first
That was my first job as in broadcasting,
in,
which was as a sports reporter. Because well, this is kind of a long story. Maybe stop me if I go too long. I got out of college. Nobody when I my senior year, I was they did allow me to work on a sports program. I was at Miami University, Oxford, Ohio. Cradle of Coaches, Ara Parsekian, Woody Hayes. Um, and they said, we'll let you anchor with this other guy on the sports show. And I went, great. Except that when I went out to try to uh, interview the football coach, the basketball coach, the baseball coach, none of them would speak to me. They refused. And so there I was on this sports show, but these guys wouldn't talk to me.
so did they refuse to speak to you? Like did they give you a
They
reason?
wouldn't
I'm
be
not
interviewed
speak
by me.
so they wouldn't
They
even
wouldn't.
talk to you, they wouldn't answer
No,
you, they ghosted you.
no, they wouldn't even let me go out to interview them because they told the people at the we were on a PBS station, and they told the people my news director that they wouldn't talk to me. That if they wanted to be interviewed, they should send the guy out because there was a guy I anchored with. So they simply refused to speak to me. So I'm like, well, what the hell am I supposed to do now? And then I realized that we had a whole bunch of other teams. We had wrestling and gymnastics and tennis and swimming and archery and all these other teams that no one ever paid attention to. So I started going up to them and saying, I'd like to do a story. And they were delighted. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
So I covered every other team there was. And, so I went, yep, I want to do this. It's great. I got out of college, had my little reel from my college show, but they were all taped, by the way, not live. And I moved to Washington, D.C. I wasn't thinking. I just wanted to move somewhere that wasn't where my parents lived. And I couldn't even get an interview. I couldn't walk in a door. I couldn't fill out a form. I mean, there was nothing. And I worked in a bar in Washington, D.C. I was a waitress, which was very fun, I must say, as I recall. Um, I enjoyed that time. And my parents were horrified because they kept saying I was nothing after college. But one night I went to a Washington Capitals game, and my aunt was with me, and her friend was there, and he was an amateur ice hockey official, which meant he did kids, maybe men's leagues, kids
Right.
leagues, that kind of thing, high school. And he was bemoaning the fact that there weren't enough hockey officials. And my aunt goes, "Oh, Annie can skate." And I said, "Yes, I can." And he said, "Then you should apply to be a referee." And I said, "Okay." And I did. I have no idea why, but if that moment hadn't happened, my life would be entirely different, because I took the test. I took a few classes. I took the test. I bought my first pair of hockey skates. And one morning, after working a shift at the restaurant till 3 in the morning, at 6 o'clock, and I'm there to do like 6-year-old hockey players. And I don't know if you've ever seen 6-year-old hockey players, with their little jerseys at their ankles and their sawed-off sticks, and their little helmets are too big and they're
Trying to
tilting to one
jump the
side.
blue line.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And so I tied up those hockey skates, and I'm like exhausted because I've been up all night. And I skate out, and I learned something very valuable. Do you know the difference between hockey skates and figure skates?
Not probably in I know the blade difference in
What is the
structure.
blade difference?
Well, you have like the toe things on
Yes.
a figure skate.
You get an A. That is the answer.
I
There
know
are toe
what's the
picks.
toe picks? Okay.
Toe picks. So toe picks on figure skates. Now they're for landing jumps and doing important things, but for lazy skaters like me, they were for when I fell down and I dig into the ice and hop right back up. So there I go out to take my first face off with these little tiny hockey players, and I bent over and there were no toe picks, so I fell over, and
Oh.
I am flat on the ice. And I went, damn. And I dug my toe pick, my toe into the ice, but there was no toe pick, so I fell again. I fell 3 times trying to get up.
And how did the 6-year-old audience that you had
I
in a
will
nice
never.
tight circle around you at
They
center
were.
ice?
They're staring down at me like, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And nobody said, like the arena is practically empty except for some parents up in the stands. And I'm like, "This is horrible." And I got up and I did manage to take the face off. Now I remember nothing about the rest of the game. Absolutely nothing. However, I remembered when I was driving home from the game, I said, "Hey, wait a minute. I don't know enough about sports to be a competent sports reporter. I don't. I never played football. I never played hockey. And now I did work with hockey teams, so I knew hockey pretty well. I didn't know basketball. I didn't know soccer. I really didn't know these sports because I'd never had the opportunity to play. I was before Title IX. So I decided then and there on that ride home that I was going to become a certified amateur official in those five main team spectator sports: football, baseball, ice hockey, soccer, and basketball. And I
Is
was going to
that
do that
is
for
that
five
like an
years.
EGOT? Is that like winning an Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony type
I
thing?
something I don't know. All I know is that I made that decision. I was going to work in the bar for 5 years. I was going to become an official in those sports, and that somewhere some forward-thinking news director would think I was fabulous, and that's what happened.
So, at any point, did you ever think that you could become a professional official?
Oh, yes, I had those dreams a couple of times. In 1981, I went to umpire school, and they call it, Bill Kinnaman's Professional Umpire School in Florida, in St. Pete. And yeah, I had worked a couple of years of baseball, which that was interesting because, of course, there were no women umpires either, let alone women officials in football. I was always the only woman, and so someone suggested I go to umpire school, so I signed up and I paid my $800, and I spent 5 weeks at umpire school in 1981 when women just didn't do that sort of thing. And it
Oh,
was
so,
it
what did your fellow classmates or whatever they're called at that point? How did they receive your presence at Empire School?
Well, first of all, the staff was very interesting. I would learn later that they never thought I'd show up. And when I did, they weren't quite sure what to do with me. Luckily, there was like most of the guys lived in barracks, and there was there was a little house they had where some older guys. Not everybody wanted to be a professional umpire, and I didn't think I did either. I just wanted to be a better umpire, and so there was a room for me. So I did. have to go live in the barracks. But many of them didn't think I would really show up.
So
When I did,
I want to stop you real quick because I'm having trouble getting through my mind that there are amateur officials that just want to get better at their job. Every time I dealt with an amateur official, not every time, but I would often be like, I don't know why you're doing this. I mean, you don't look like
I
you're
don't know. I did
enjoying
it for
it.
40 years.
We're not enjoying your officiating. You don't look like you're enjoying officiating us. So I never even thought about someone that wasn't in the professional ranks, or at least that being their final destination or goal, going to something like umpire school. It'd be like
No,
going to clown school, but not wanting to be in the circus.
Well, yeah, but you have to understand, some of the people were older, and maybe they'd been umpiring and they just wanted to be better, and that's what it is. They don't call it professional umpire school, but it is where professional umpires start. So I will say that the number one student in my class in 1981 was Angel Hernandez.
Is that the person that's recently been having some issues?
Yes,
Okay.
that's Angel. Yeah, yeah. So I'm saying that's where they all start out.
So
But
let
not
me ask you. Hold on. Let me stop you real quick. So if that's a classmate, were you better or worse than Angel Hernandez? Because I think his decision making or his calls, and I don't know 100%, but I think that's what's been called into question in recent times. So would you have considered yourself next to Angel Hernandez when you were there with him a better officiate than him, or do you think that he was better? Or how do you even determine that, I guess?
First of all, Angel is probably about my age and I'm pushing 70. Okay. So the bottom line is it takes its toll on you over the years. If you statistically look at Angel's calls, he's not the worst official in Major League Baseball by far. He's not, because now we have all the statistics on how many pitches does he miss and all this, and he's not the worst, but he's the one that everybody loves to hate, and I don't know why. He's a nice guy, and he was number one in our class, and he was the best guy there out of 130 some odd campers. We were campers. I think he takes a lot of crap, and here's what's going to happen. Pretty soon, we're not going to have real officials. We're going to have AI. We're going to have those things. All officials are going to go away, and when that happens, sports fans are going to desperately miss someone to scream at.
Oh yeah, I hadn't even. That's weird. I hadn't even thought about that point.
And I encourage everybody, especially if you have children, I encourage you, if they play a sport, you get out there and you officiate one game once. You get, I had a gentleman who was a columnist for a newspaper in Arizona, and he wrote something bad about officials, and I called him up, and I said, look, you want to see what we do? He was dissing umpires in his column. I said, I got a men's league game next week. Come on out. We'll give you a uniform. I'll put you at third base. And he went, okay, and he did it. So he came out, and there were three officials, and we had him. So there were actually four of us. And I put him at third base. Boy, he wrote a whole different column after that about what it's like. It is an impossible job. Half the people hate you half the time. And, I used to think people were mean to me because I was a woman showing up as an umpire. But it was because I was wearing a chest protector and a mask. I mean, they didn't like me because of my uniform. And it is one of the most difficult jobs I've ever had. And the problem is also officials think they're all tough guys. And so when I show up at umpire school, they don't know what the hell I'm there for. And I just wanted to get better. However, umpire school tends to be a little bit like being kidnapped. Stockholm syndrome, where you start to identify with your kidnappers. And by the end, I wanted to be an umpire. I wanted to go to the minor leagues, despite the fact that, there's cheap hotels and no food and nothing but abuse. And I would find out later, and, they abused me there while I was there. For example, you remember John McSherry?
Yes.
Okay. 365 pounds of angry man, which is not real. That's was his persona. And so he's the head instructor, and he shows up after having a root canal, hungover, and was just a freak. Everybody was terrified of him. He would make grown men quit. They would just leave. And so you knew eventually McSherry was going to get to you. So one day he calls me over and he goes, Butler, I said, what? He said, you bring up the balls to field 2 at after lunch for training. I said, yes, sir. And so I went to the place where the balls were before. I'm 20 minutes early, and there's a young official there, a minor league umpire named John Higgins, and he's standing there. I said, I'm here to get the balls for field 2. And he said, oh, they're already up there. I said, no, no, no. McSherry told me to get them. He said, I promise you they're up there. I said, okay. I trotted up. I'm one of the first people there, standing around. Everybody's getting up there. You can't be late, or they'll kill you for being late. And all of a sudden, McSherry goes, okay, we're going to be working at first base. We're going to be waiting for the pop in the glove and looking for the foot on the base. And so let's go. And he goes, where's the balls? And he starts screaming, where are the fucking balls? And he looks at me, he goes, Butler, you were supposed to bring the balls. Why don't you have any balls? And I went, but Higgins told me that. He goes, shut the fuck up. He said, you go get the balls. And while you're gone, he said, all your friends are going to run laps till you get back. And I ran as fast as I've ever run in my life. And they cursed me all the way up and down the hill. So that's the kind of things they did to you at umpire school. And, it wasn't because I was a woman. It was because the idea is, if you can't take shit at umpire school, how are you going to take it on the field? How are you going to live with that? Yeah. The people that left were people that shouldn't have been umpires. Now, you're going to ask me, how did I find out these things? It's because 7 years later, I ran into John Higgins, and I married him.
Ah.
And he told me all the stories about me. He told me how McSherry was the only one that put me in the top 20 because he thought I had good officiating skills, which I do. But he said he thought I ran horribly. He said, Higgins, she runs worse than I do, because I was born with a crooked foot. But I do run funny. But so I married Higgins, and he told me all the things that they said about me.
So were you curious of what they said about you? I mean, was that once you got married, were you like, hey, by the way, could you fill me in? Because that's my problem. My wife says one of my many problems. I literally never think about anyone ever talking about me, thinking about me. And so like when we walk into a situation, they're like, oh, we were just talking about when Rodney did this. And we just always find that way, because I never think about. So when you were in class with these people, or post that before Higgins, were you concerned, or did you care what was being said about you?
Oh yes, of course I did. I like people to like me. I do. But the thing I learned later is that I was saying before, McSherry was the only one that put me in the top 20, because the top 20 got assigned to minor league instructional schools, which meant I could have made the minor leagues. But all the other guys, many of them who were minor league umpires, and Joe Brinkman was also one of them. He's a former major leaguer. They refused to put me in the top 20 because Brinkman said, we're not sending a woman from our school. So would I have made it? I don't know. But the bottom line is they just did not want me to go. They didn't want to have a reputation of sending a woman to the minor leagues.
I'm sorry, go ahead, finish.
Today there are a few women in the minor leagues, but they still don't have a woman in the majors. They act like it's friggin' brain surgery. It's not. Okay, but they still don't have a woman. So I'm there in 1981. Do the math.
Yeah. I mean, what was your favorite, or maybe not favorite, what was your best part of being an official?
Oh, that's hard. Best part. Let me say here that while I did all 5 of those sports, football and baseball were my main sports. I did hockey 5 years. I sucked at soccer. I sucked at basketball.
How do you define sucks at those sports? Like, you just weren't good. You didn't know the calls. You weren't decisive in making those calls.
No. Honestly, officials will tell you, if you can officiate one sport well, you can officiate any sport, because it's not about the rules or the game or the ball or the court. It's about, can you make a decision? Can you be in the proper position to make the call? Can you concentrate constantly? Can you be decisive? Those kinds of things. And if you can do it in football, you can do it in baseball, you can do it anywhere. I just didn't like soccer very much, and there was way too much running. I told you I was born with a bit of a crooked foot, and so I ran awkwardly in a way. Now I never told anybody that's why I ran like that, but I just was awkward. So soccer, there's way too much running around. Basketball, I can't stand the sound their sneakers make on the floor.
Alrighty
It's
then.
I'm being honest. There
No,
you go.
that's great. That just is not one that I've ever heard, and because it is a distinct sound. I mean, that's
It's hor I worked for the Phoenix Suns for 2 years, and the squeaking made me insane. However, later on, a year, like 30 years into my career, maybe 25, one of my commissioner of officials took me aside and said, it's really too bad that you don't officiate women's sports. You might get somewhere. Because I did football and baseball were the ones I loved. I didn't want to do softball. That's not baseball. It's not remotely baseball.
right.
So I did baseball for 25 years. I did football for 40. And you ask what is my favorite thing, I think was the question.
Yes.
And I'll tell you, for 14 years. Wait, I'm going to ask you a test question
Sure.
first. You ready?
Sure.
Okay. How many referees on a football field? You can win beer on this.
6.
Okay, now here I'm going to give you a little hint. The number is the same in Pop Warner, and it's the same as the NFL.
I have that. That helps me 0.
Okay, there's only one. The
Oh.
referee wears the white hat.
Oh, there you
referee
go.
Says
Okay.
I have holding 76 offense. That's a 10-yard penalty from the spot of the foul. It remains second down. That's the referee. Okay, the one that has the microphone. So my last 24 years of doing football, I was the referee. I was the crew chief. I'm in charge the moment I put my foot on the field. I love that part.
So let me do a side note here on football refereeing. When the hell did the NFL referees start getting jacked? God, every time I watch an NFL
What do you mean, jack? Jack
to
me is throwing somebody out of a game.
No, well, I mean, they're so ripped now. Like all they do is work out.
Yes,
oh my God, it's like and they're like first down, and you're like Jiminy crack horn. I mean, it's just
and they've got their uniforms are tailored
Yeah.
so that you can see their muscles. Well, and that is a reflection of the fact that for so long, especially in baseball, that officials were fat old guys, right?
Yeah.
Out of shape. But here's the deal. Certainly in baseball, you can get away with that a little, but even today, we do not have John McSherry's anymore. I love him, though I do. John McSherry came to my wedding. Okay, he was a lovely man. So great guy, but 365 pounds on a good day. Ken Kaiser, I don't know if you remember him.
Yeah.
These big giant men. You can't do that anymore. And you especially can't do it in a sport where you got to run like football. And when you've got to work with athletes who are the cream of the crop, I hate to use a cliche, but guys that are big and fast, you can't be slow. That's why I retired. I couldn't get out of the way anymore.
And it's
right?
It's interesting now because you're naming these referees and these officials, and it seems like growing up in the 70s and 80s, and maybe it was just how my mind worked at that time, but those you knew the names of the officials, good, bad, or indifferent. So where we lived in Kansas City, we lived just a subdivision over from last name Steve Palermo.
Oh, sure.
And so when he got shot trying to stop a robbery in progress, when him and some other officials were out to dinner or something like that. And but even we knew who he was before he got shot because it seemed like they interacted more with the games. And I even wrote this down as a note that, I remember in the 70s and early 80s, managers in sports being much more Billy Martin. I mean, I knew more about Billy Martin in the 70s and early 80s than I probably did many of the top players.
Well, I think part of it is officiating has changed a great deal. When I started, it was common for officials to go and chat with coaches. Like I'll talk football on the sidelines. You go, hey coach, how you doing? What's up? Blah blah blah. Yeah, you would have a pregame meeting with them, which they still do. But you would chat for a while. They told us eventually, there's no chatting. You get in and out of there. You do that in 3 minutes and move away, or the other coach is going to think you're friends. And if a call doesn't go their way, we don't want them to think that you're buddies with that other coach. So it became very sterile. It became where you couldn't really have a chat, even if, and it turns out that was right. I had a friend, I was friends with a coach, and for years I didn't work his games. This is kind of an off thing. And one night, then I started working his games because he was fine. He used to be a coach in the NFL, and my crew threw him out, and he went nuts on me out in the middle of the field. I'm like, George, and he screamed, and he never spoke to me again. So the idea is you can't be friends with them. You can't. They don't want you to spend too much time talking to a coach unless it's in the process of officiating the game.
Did you ever have players, because of their personality, I used to play in a summer pro-am league basketball back in the day, and I remember that and my parents hated this. I was the hothead, and that was just, I was a John McEnroe type. My parents hated that in the 70s. They thought that's not how sports were done. They didn't understand. I mean, that's just my personality.
I agree with them. I wouldn't have let you play.
Yeah, well, and my thing is, that's my... well, they should have let me play hockey when we first moved to Kansas City, which I wanted to do desperately, but they thought that I was too frail. One of my problems is always being so much bigger than everyone else, always playing 2 grades up in every sport that I played growing up just because of my size. Hockey probably would have been good for me because there's always someone bigger than you in hockey. Or tougher than.
But you don't have to be big to be good at hockey.
But I'm talking about someone needed to put me in my place, and I rarely. And my thing with officials is, and I've talked about this. We've talked about it in the High IQ Society forums, that I feel like I personally move at a different speed than what everyone else moves at. And so there's a way you can describe this using a train car and everything. But when I see plays live on TV, to me, it always seems like it's in slow motion. Like I'll see something and I'll go, they need to challenge that. They need to do this. Even when my wife or someone else is like, what are you talking about? And then they'll go back and look and they're like, oh my God, how did you, in my reflexes like that, like if something was to come at me or something, I typically have very better than average reflexes. And so I would get mad when I was like, how could you not see that was in and not out? Or vice versa.
I'll tell you exactly how, okay? From 40 years of officiating
yes.
training. They're either too close to the play, and that's the problem. Young officials especially want to barge right in and be real close, and you don't get the whole picture there. And if you don't see the whole thing, you can't make a call. So sometimes you're too close. Sometimes you got a bad angle. Sometimes you have a hangover. Okay. Sometimes your boss yelled at you at work and your wife's mad at you or your husband's mad at you. Sometimes you get distracted. We are human beings. And the thing I don't understand is a coach can send in a bad play. A quarterback can miss the receiver by a mile. A kid can miss a tackle and they get back up and rarely do people scream and yell and say they're cheating or whatever. I blink my eyes the wrong way. I miss something. And today it's all over the internet. Okay. In the old days, it happened on a Friday night, sorry, there you go. Did the best you can. And now it's everywhere.
Right.
And, there's a reason we can't keep young officials longer than 2 or 3 years. They quit because they're not willing to deal with all the crap. I mean, I have had my tire knifed over a Sandy Koufax baseball game. These are 14-year-old baseball players. I have had police escorts to my car on more than one occasion. I have had people, talking nose to nose with me, spit coming out of their mouths. I have had people call me horrible things, send me things in the mail that I don't even want to repeat. I mean, I'm just saying that we put up with a lot of crap, but we do the best we can. No coach is perfect. No player is perfect. Parents make mistakes all the time, but we're not allowed to make one. How is that even remotely fair?
Right. And I
'Cause I
understand that. My point is, like, so I think originally where I was going with the question, when I used to play in a program game, there was a specific referee that he would, like, if someone on the other team and I were having words, exchanging whatever we were doing, he may come in, like, on the way to a timeout or something, or a dead ball, he would have a word for me. And I remember one specific time, I think I was making a turn to go back to finish a conversation with a player, if you know what I mean. And he just came over and grabbed me and he's like, "How is your family?" And just kind of walked me off just to try to.
That's good
It
officiating.
was. And so I always appreciate, but I wasn't afraid to challenge someone to be like, because my two things with officiating, I'm sure you've always heard this, is I never gave a shit if officiating was good or bad. I wanted it to be consistent. I didn't care how you go. I
And
didn't.
that's the biggest difficulty.
Yeah.
Are you consistent in everything you do? I mean, if you're doing a baseball game and I'm looking at maybe 300 pitches, right? And I've got to make a call or no a call all the time, or I'm in a football game. Even when I don't throw my flag, I have made a call, right?
Right.
It's a no call, and you have to concentrate constantly, and it's very hard as human beings not to get distracted by the hot dogs you can smell on the grill when you're hungry.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that it's an impossible job. Even if you're perfect, half the people hate you because their team lost. And I get very frustrated, especially when young people want to blame us, want to blame the officials. Because, I truly believe sports are a brilliant thing for young people to do. Not because they're going to be pro athletes, not because they're going to get college scholarships, because most of them never will. But what will they learn? They will learn punctuality. They will learn teamwork. They will learn how to be leaders. They will learn how to follow rules and follow directions. And these are business skills. If a kid has on their resume that they played for their team in high school, the team doesn't have to win a championship. Kid doesn't can sit on the bench, but someone who's doing the hiring knows that kid probably has some good skills
Yeah.
that are worthwhile. And let me say that as a caveat. Honestly, if the kid's in the marching band or they're in theater or in any debate club, they also learn these things. But that's why I love sports for kids and these extracurriculars, because kids are learning business skills. They're not there to be professional athletes. And I get very tired of parents who think their 12-year-old is going to be, a pitcher in the big leagues when probably that's not happening. And they want to blame me because the kid didn't, you know, strike out enough kids or their team didn't win that day. That's not what it's supposed to be about.
Right. Yeah. I'm a firm believer that some parents should just not go watch their kids.
Oh, I agree. Sometimes I think there should never be parents allowed
Yeah.
because they ruin it. I can't tell you the number of times I've seen kids just crumble because their parents are screaming and coming down, screaming from the stands and putting them down. And when, sometimes you're out on a field and there's a possibility we're going to have fights out here.
Yeah.
This is dangerous, frightening stuff that ruins it. And at some point, and I bet there are a lot of listeners that are into sports that have kids who play sports that are going to say, yeah, I've gone to fields and there haven't been any officials. And guess what? No game. Without the ref, it's only recess. It's not real. So if you keep chasing young officials off, which is happening in incredible numbers.
I think I saw that quote on your website or somewhere.
I have a shirt that says it.
Okay, that's where I saw it. Without the refs,
shirt.
it's only recess.
Right. That's from, there's a magazine, Referee Magazine, the National Association of Sports Officials, which as a sports official I was part of for years or a member of. And yeah, they have those because, officials sometimes don't go out and claim, our relatives don't often claim us. Sometimes people are embarrassed. I'm not. Okay. I'm proud of being the years I spent officiating. And honestly, I'll tell you this, I don't miss broadcasting. I don't miss teaching. But I miss Friday night football, and sometimes I walk by a baseball field and I want to be out there again. I miss those things. And if you had told me all those years ago when I first became an official, so I could become a sportscaster, that I would still have been an official 40 years later, I would have said you were crazy.
I want to ask you this because I'm going to try to do a segue from comments that you made, and you just made one about walking by a baseball field and wishing you were still out there.
Mhm.
You have a blog, and one
Yes, I
of your
do.
recent posts was
I
time for
know what it
girls
is.
softball to go.
Yes,
Would you
I
like to
got
talk
hammered.
about that since we've kind of been talking baseball and you said you wanted to be out there in the field? How come you want softball to go?
Okay. Almost every game I ever called on a diamond was baseball, but every once in a while they'd say, "Ooh, gee, would you go out there? We don't have enough officials. Would you go out and call the softball game?" And a couple times I did. What did I learn? I learned softball is not baseball and will never be. Now, I am not denigrating those who play softball, and I, especially those 40 somethings who still think, they're big athletes. And I think girls that play are great. That's wonderful. However, girls play softball because the powers that be in the olden days thought they weren't tough enough to play baseball. Let's face it, there's only 60 feet between those bases, not 90. They play with a bigger ball. It's hard, but it's big. And they play with, it's not the same sport. And so in my world, I think girls should have the opportunity to play baseball if they want to. And let's face it, league of their own, they were playing it in the 40s. They were doing just fine. And on top of that, I umpired in a professional women's league, very short-lived professional women's league, and those women could flat out, fly to catch a ball, and they were sliding into bases. They were tough women, and for someone to make them play softball was silly. Okay, do you remember the young lady who her picture was in my blog,
It
who
is, yeah.
played
And
pitched the
Monique
14-year-old?
Davis. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, 14 years old. She's pitching in the Little League World Series. She never got to play baseball after that. She had to play softball because that's all that was offered. Or
I'm going to give a quick shout out now that you mentioned that to a young lady from my elementary school, Michelle Risser. That she was one of the fastest people. I always thought that I was fast. I had long legs. I ran. I thought I was fast. Oh my God. She could put me, I mean, she would, she'd be like Tyreek Hill nowadays. She would be like,
Mhm.
doing some little stutter step and give me the peace sign as she put me in the dust. And so I was always acutely aware of how good female athletes were. Because to me, an athlete was an athlete. I didn't give a shit. If you could help me win, there were no shits given. Of
But here's the problem with girls in baseball is that the schools go, oh well, if they want to try out for the boys team, they can. Well, that's not an equitable solution. It just isn't. Girls shouldn't have to try out for a guys team. So what's the answer? The answer to me is if you want to play softball, go ahead. I'm talking about interscholastic baseball for girls. Anybody wants to play in softball leagues elsewhere, that's fine. But if you're going to offer boys baseball, you offer girls baseball. How do we get them to play well? You start them in little league. Let girls play baseball in little league because the most difficult skills are required to play baseball. They have to catch and hit and pitch and it's not like football where you go, here's a ball, son, run that way, right? Or knock him down. Those are not really defined skills. But to catch a ball, pitch a ball, hit a ball, these are difficult things to do. So teach them when they're 8 and 9. And then when they get to ninth grade, now they've got some skills to be able to play on a high school team. And that's what I wrote in that article. And some people gave me crap for it. They said I was being disrespectful to girls who played softball. That was not my intent. My intent was to say girls need the opportunity to play both.
yeah. Yeah, and I would agree with that. And I always thought it was interesting because there was also the League of Their Own. There was a series, I think, on Amazon.
Oh, the movie was so brilliant.
Yeah, the
I
movie
can't
was
imagine they
great,
could
and then
improve
this
on it.
kind of expanded. And I don't know if it was more true storytelling about actual individuals than what the movie did, but it always struck me as interesting why they're dressing them up in skirts and stuff.
Oh, well, they had to back
Well,
then
I
because it was
know,
all
but
about their sexuality and how feminine they were. But I'll tell you this, I also when I was I went into print reporting after I got out of when it was determined I was no longer pretty enough to be in front of a camera, which happens
they
in
did
life.
that in the 80s quite a bit.
Oh no, this was 90. I
Well,
was
yeah,
pushing 40 when I couldn't get a job anymore after being on 5 TV stations, including ESPN. Nobody would hire me anywhere. I was devastated. But I went to print reporting for a while, and they sent me out to do a story on the girls playing for the state title in softball in high school. And I went out there, and these girls are dressed in little shorts, and they had little bows in their hairs, and they had little bears painted on their cheeks, and they were singing and cheering. And I wrote a scathing article about how if girls want to be considered serious athletes, they should wear real uniforms. And the team they played against, the girls came out wearing like baseball uniforms. And these other ones were all cutesy poo with their little bows and stuff. They didn't wear hats. I'm like, you don't look like athletes.
You know,
and I caught some shit for that too.
Being an SEC guy, I remember it was late into the 90s of maybe not. Part of me wants to say it was the early 2000s, but that seems so late. But when teams were known as like the women's basketball team was the Lady Gators.
Right.
And not just the Gators, the Florida Gators. You know, it's the women's basketball. I always thought that was funny when I was there in the 80s that Lady Gators. Okay.
Well, I understand the need to, especially if you're covering a team, you're writing a news story, or to differentiate between the two.
But I think that was their official. I think that was their official name.
Of course, it was.
Yeah, which
as opposed to saying the ladies team. Yeah, it's just it was like that. I'm not going to get too upset about that because. Yeah.
Let me ask you because you were talking about some of the skills that it takes to play baseball. What sport do you think that people need the most skill to participate in at a high level?
Probably baseball.
You think so?
Because think of how defined those skills are. I'm not saying that there aren't incredibly defined skills in other sports. I'm saying as a package, again, hit a baseball, catch a baseball, pitch, throw, and get the ball where you need it to be. These are very, very defined skills. Again, as I explained before, if you have a guy who's never played football, and we've got guys coming from different parts of the world that they drop into colleges now that play real well, and you go, okay, that guy in front of you, don't let him hit the guy behind you. That's not a horribly defined skill unless you're a left tackle. And you're going to say, why is that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Offensive linemen are the most intelligent players by aptitude tests, very skilled. And the problem with being a left tackle is that we don't have enough left-handed people to play that position. If you have a big giant kid and he's left-handed and he can be a left tackle, that'd be great, because I was engaged to an NFL tackle for about 5 years, and they switched him from right tackle to left tackle. And I went, so what's the big deal? The big deal is it's like learning to write with your left hand and you're right-handed. Bet you never thought of that, right?
Well, I'm actually ambidextrous. So what you're saying, I mean,
who is? Most people aren't.
They aren't. I remember very early in elementary school, I went up. So I'm predominantly left-handed, but my parents, I was adopted. My parents didn't know how to teach someone with left-handed. So they tried to, and back in the 70s, we were also ostracized because we had special scissors that said lefty on them and had the green rubber on them because we couldn't.
Oh, hell, my grandfather was beaten for being a left-hander. They beat him into being a right-hander.
But
I think.
I was just going to say, I remember being in elementary school and on more than one occasion being at the board and the teacher going, I thought you were left-handed, and me just going, oh, that's right, and switching hands and finishing whatever I was doing.
But most people can't do that. So
right.
I bring up the idea that from some of the skills in football, I mean, yes, catching a ball, being a receiver, is your tight end, whatever, catching the ball, that's a defined skill. But much of it is just running around, knocking people over. But if you've got to pitch a ball to a very specific spot, that's very defined as a skill.
So now, here's something that I have not played since high school. And once again, I don't think I move at the same speed as everyone else. I just batted. So now this was much earlier. It was 1979, summer of 79. I would have been 11. That season, I was 49 of 52 at the plate, which is like 940. I bet, 940. And it's funny because when I was growing up and playing, I remember once that the bases were loaded. A pitch was 3 feet over my head, and I decided I was going to lumberjack swinging at it because I didn't want to walk. I was fucking pissed that they were going to walk me with the bases loaded. So then the next pitch, I hit a grand slam. I never thought about anything, and it's weird because I've started watching Trevor Bauer's YouTube channel. And he talks about release points and all these different things. And I was always like, they're throwing, I just need to hit it. I don't give a shit what you're trying to do. I'm just going to hit what you're throwing. Like,
But when you
it never.
how complicated it is, with all the different pitches and all the different locations, and it's very complicated. And honestly, if I had a kid playing, youth sports, I would never let them pitch a ball till ninth grade. Never.
Yeah.
Because it's too hard on their bodies. But in the defined skills area, you asked me, and I think to me it's baseball.
So I would have chosen hockey myself.
I'm not saying there aren't defined skills there too.
And maybe it's not defined skills. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's not defined skills. Maybe it's this. No one in baseball. Unfortunately, this is in the 70s. I much prefer 70s baseball opposed to these wimps that we have playing today. If I see another guy run out of the fucking baseline going to second base on a double play, that pisses me off. I grew up with Hal McRae going to second base to make sure that that double play is not turned.
You're not allowed to do that anymore.
Yeah, and that pisses me off.
You can't take out the second baseman.
You should be able to put him out into left field if you need to. Well, you know what's funny too is I used to talk. I when this was an early show and just about baseball or just about sports, I would lament. I believe I called them pussies because they wore gloves on their hand when they slid, and I'm like, what is wrong with you sissies that you're putting gloves on so you don't hurt your hands? But then I started watching old videos, like Pete Rose sliding, almost anyone sliding. And I will say a lot of it back in the 70s, I would blame on the AstroTurf because they had boxes for dirt instead of a dirt infield. So like second base was like a square box. And no one started sliding right where the carpet met the dirt. And so they would start their slide, like, because I know a lot of people got hurt back then, but that was more on I don't know. I believe, I feel like sports have become very, I know.
Let's be honest. How are you going to swing a bat if you got, burns from the AstroTurf on your hands? I know you're not supposed to be, you're right, not the turf, but leading into the back. You won't be able to swing a bat. I have no problem with them wearing gloves.
I watched Pete Rose though slide, and like I get it, the Charlie Hustle thing, but that guy did not know how to slide.
Shoulder down, you can't do that anymore because honestly, most of the sports now are all about protecting players because it's about their livelihoods and it's about you get your big time players hurt. Look at how we wrap quarterbacks in bubble wrap now. We just do, because if you knock Patrick Mahomes out of a game, people are going to go, oh, we don't want to watch now because he's not in the game. So they're protecting their livelihood. The NFL wants, needs to keep making more billions of dollars every year. So they don't want their quarterbacks hurt. They don't really care about the guys, down the bench. But, they want to make sure the stars are still in there. So they change the rules. And let me tell you something, as an official, you guys think it's confusing. Every year there's rule changes at every level of sports. Every year they go, oh, okay, we're going to change this rule now. And you've been calling something one way for 10 years, and now they're changing it. That's how we screw things up. Yeah.
I want to touch base on your blog one more time because I thought this was, I loved your last last blog post. I have always said it's about the story told. If I die peacefully in my sleep, my wife is supposed to drag me to the desk, put on some objectionable stuff on the computer and make it, because I want a story to be told. The coroner doesn't show up and go and then tell his wife that night, oh, this guy, he died peacefully in his sleep. It was so nice to see. I want him to go, oh my God, we got there and this guy was looking at some weird stuff. I mean, I always feel like there should be a story. And so your last post was, given a choice, I picked death by a falling space rock. Wouldn't that be cool? And I saw that and I was like, that is amazing, because it's always about the story.
Well, I feel that when you're dying, if you don't have a whole lot of stories, you haven't lived right. And so I agree with you there. And we may, I've been very fortunate. I have a lot of stories. But the falling space rock thing, I'm a mineral collector. I have spent my whole life collecting rocks.
Oh,
In
hold on,
fact,
hold on, hold on. Uh, we're gonna get to that. That we haven't even.
oh,
The
I'm waiting on the rocks. But that's why being hit by a falling space rock would be so cool to me.
yeah.
It'd be like a rock from space. I mean, yeah. So I wouldn't want to be vaporized completely. But the part that people laughed about is that I have had a lot of surgeries, mostly because of that lie they told me about sports being good for me, right?
Yes.
So I
I
have
noticed the
quite a bit of,
hardware in your foot.
yeah, oh, well, that was a different one. That one actually wasn't sports related. That was I got COVID, passed out, and woke up with a shattered leg.
What?
But
Hold
that
on.
was the
No, no,
leg
no,
that
no, no, no. You can't say you had COVID, passed out, and woke up with a shattered leg and leave it at that.
Oh, okay. So I had COVID.
Yes.
I had hallucinations. And the only one I remember is that I was being attacked by words, punctuation marks, and phrases. And I was knocking them away like Serena Williams with a racket, right? Because these words were attacking me. And probably because I'm a writer, right? And they were hitting me like I was in a video game. The more I knocked them away, the more they were coming at me. And so somehow I got up and I was sick. And so I was trying to get to the bathroom. And then I woke up on the floor. I don't know how much later. And I kept trying to stand up and I couldn't. I couldn't stand up. I didn't feel anything. And I crawled back to bed. And Ryan came over. He said, "What's wrong?" And my foot was going the wrong way. And the
Yeah, it looks
irony is,
gross.
yeah, it was horrible. I broke my fibula, my tibia, and tore a tendon off. But here's the thing. Remember I told you I was born with a bad foot?
Yeah.
It was that foot. And guess what? They fixed it. And it's perfect now.
There you go. The crowd goes. I thought you were going to.
I wish I'd had it done 30 years ago. I could have run straight on the football field. And
I was just going to mention one day I went into my doctor. I had thumb surgery and I went in, and I had an appointment on Monday, and over the weekend I dislocated my other thumb. So when I went there, she was just like, "So how's your bad hand?" And I was like, "All right." And she goes, "Well, how's your good hand?" I go, "I don't have one of those anymore." And I showed her my thumb, and it was just yeah. So
you did it in sports, right?
It was a sex injury, actually.
Oh, well.
So so I will tell you, and I haven't found the sponsor yet. That's when I changed my mind on sex swings. I always thought sex swings were some kinky thing. But as I reached my mid-50s and I've injured myself just in routine, what I would think was routine sexual acts with my wife, I now think that that sex swings are just supposed to help us older people not injure ourselves.
Oh, well, yeah. I'm going to go back to the sex. See what I did?
Yep.
The sports injuries.
Okay.
I've had rotator cuff surgery twice. Okay. I've broken my arm and my one arm twice, my elbow. All of this is most of it's sports related. And so I have titanium in me. I just had spinal fusion 4 months ago, from sports injuries, from getting hit probably with baseballs behind home plate. And so I have titanium in my neck, I have titanium in my leg. And so I've instructed my children that after they donate my body to science, or, I'm an organ donor, they can take all the parts. They're going to cremate me, and then they'll only be like ashes and metal bits. And so I told them that they should then take the metal bits and make a wind chime and hang me in the yard. And I thought that was pretty brilliant.
Is something, but it's gonna segue me into when you kind of made a description, a pitch about yourself. There were only the whole pitch was very interesting, which is why we're together and talking now. But there were two words that stuck out. I have done shows on toilet babies, and those are babies that their moms didn't know they were pregnant and ended up having the babies in the toilets. And see, we've heard, and I've seen TV shows of this happening, this occurrence, but I've never ever heard of someone saying, "Yeah, I was one of those babies that I was born in a toilet." And I recently realized that I had heard the term rock collector before. Yet I had never actually met someone who collected rocks.
What does
But
that
yet,
have to do with the other thing?
just because that I've heard of something but never met that. And I've heard of rock. I have never met anyone that's rock collected. I've heard of rock collecting, but I've never heard of it. And literally my first 2 pages of notes for this interview, all rock collecting in reference.
Okay, well, I'm staring at a wall right now. I live in Arizona some of the time, but I live in the Virgin Islands the rest of the time. And on my wall here in the Virgin Islands, I have about 20 specimens, but I have 400 in my living room at home in Arizona. I've collected rocks my entire life, and Arizona is like a heaven for rock collectors because there are 100,000 old abandoned mines that were, let's face it, who would have stopped in Arizona if it wasn't for copper, silver, and gold? Nobody before air conditioning.
But
So
you collect, so you're bringing them things from the outdoors. You're bringing them indoors.
of course, yes, I have hundreds and hundreds of specimens.
So
And
your family. So like when you pass on, because you just had a blog
I got hit
post.
by a giant space rock.
Yeah, you get hit by a giant space rock. So whoever, like, I was trying to figure out, like, if I found out my mom collected rocks, she passes away, I go there, and I would be kind of pissed that I had to clean that out. This is heavy, it's messy. So, like, or is someone going to appreciate all the time and effort that you've been collecting these rocks?
Yes. First of all, I have a beautiful giant case that's built, that's lit, that's got glass. It's like the first thing people see when they come into my living room. They're like, "Oh my God!" It's like a museum. So yes,
See, and
they're
this is
beautiful.
why I'm glad we're not doing video, because the look on my face as you're describing that you have built a case with lighting for rocks.
Yes. And luckily, my youngest son, who's now 26, I think, he is the only true rocker in the family with me. So he loves rock. So
Oh my God, did you just call yourself rockers?
we are rockers.
Oh
yes, we
my. Hold on.
We are.
I have a sound for that. I don't know if that sound for you or that sound for me
Yes.
or the audience, but so you're rockers, are you?
Yes, we are. And we go out in the desert and we dig in the ground and we have great fun. And so when I die, he gets the rocks. The other kids don't care. So yeah, he gets
So
to inherit
I
all
was
the
just
rocks.
trying to think. The only rocker that I've seen when I was in Scottsdale was Alice Cooper.
Yes, well, Alice is, yes, he
Yeah.
lives in Phoenix. Yes,
Yeah.
he does. He doesn't live in Scottsdale.
Yeah.
He lives in Phoenix. But if you're in Arizona in February, there's the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show. It is, I believe, the largest rock and mineral show on the planet. Hundreds of thousands of people go from all over the world.
I don't even think that's true. I have never
do not lie.
said fake news, but I'm going to say fake news right. You're
Just-
telling me
just
100,000
Google
people.
Tucson Gem and Mineral, no, more than that. And they fill the
Now you're
hotel
saying
room.
more than that. now you've lost me. Like this whole now
Google the
now I'm
Tucson
wondering
Gem and
whether
Mineral Show.
any of your career is even real at this point. 'Cause
You sound like my.
I just
my
I mean, and then rocker. Like if I told someone, hey, I spoke to Annie Montgomery, and they're like, what does she do? And I was like, she's a rocker. They'd be like, with what band?
Okay, well, I play the guitar too, so can I slide now?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I am a rocker, but I also play the guitar, so take it either way you want.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so let me go through some of these questions. The first one isn't a question; it was a statement. I never really thought anyone did this.
Well, I'm in one group called the Arizona Mineralogical Society, and there are 880 members. That's one club.
Have you met any of these members? So
Yes, I go on
I'm in a
trips with
club
them.
with these high IQ people, and I've met a few of them, and they're weird as fuck. I mean, like,
Well,
like in a
rockers are
good
weird.
way. They're not going to put me in a wood chipper, most likely, but they're still weird.
Well, I'm not saying rockers aren't weird. I'm just saying we go out, we meet in the middle of the desert, we go our separate ways, and we dig in
Okay.
the ground,
Oh,
and we
no,
look
no,
for
no, no, no,
treasure.
no. What on earth? So you're meeting people sometimes for the first time in the middle of the desert?
Sure.
Do they? And oh my God! And you're bringing probably shovels and picks and stuff because it's
You
rocks.
bet. And in
And let me
Arizona,
guess,
most of them are
a
ours.
plastic bag to load up with all these wonderful. I mean,
No. You don't put them in plastic.
you are one misinterpreted joke or unintended sarcasm away for being in the bag instead of the rocks being in the bag at that point.
No. And you know what? Everybody who knows me knows I'm a rocker. They know. And they don't make fun of me anymore because some of my rocks are magnificently beautiful and look like you'd find in the Museum of Natural History. So if you saw them, you'd understand.
Okay, since the first thing that I wrote down was a statement, not a question, the first question I have is how did you and when did you explain this to your family?
When I was 2 years old, I was wandering around. They have photographs of this for some
Oh
reason.
my
I'm in
gosh.
diapers and I'm putting rocks in a cup. Okay, so that was the first time. When
Okay,
I came
first
home,
of all, that should be because you had to give us the disclaimer that there was a photograph. That's how weird that behavior was. That at 2
no,
years
no,
old,
because
that they were like, no, we need to take a picture of this because if we told someone our 2-year-old is putting rocks in a cup, no one
collecting
would
rocks.
believe us. And
No, and then when I was 12, I came home from Girl Scout camp, and my mother reached in to pick up my suitcase, and the handle fell off, and it opened up and fell out into the street, and it was full of rocks. And she was horrified. And every summer when I went to camp, she would take my rock collection and throw it out in the garden, and it would rain, and all the rocks would go down into the dirt. And I would come home and dig them all back out and bring them back in.
so
And this
hold
went
on,
on my
hold
whole
on,
life.
real quick. I just want to ask. Now I don't understand your mom why she was upset when you wanted to go to college, that you wanted to do sports journalism, because quite frankly, just getting you away from the rocks. I'm just speaking from a parent. Just getting you away from the rocks, I would have said, do whatever you want to do in college at this point.
Well, but you have to understand, years later, my mother, who liked to decorate, would come to me and say, "Do you have a nice pink specimen I can put on the mantle?" So she totally didn't about the
No
face,
mom
about
should
the face.
ever utter the word to their child, do you have a pink specimen?
Well, that's what she said. Do you have a big rock for this corner of the mantle? I'm like, so she,
Hold on. What do you mean a pink rock?
like pink crystals of some kind, or like amethyst is purple, fluorite can be all kinds of colors,
So
a
I guess
turquoise.
so are you like, so now I'm not even thinking, because sometimes my mind gets so whatever. Because I'm thinking rocks, and then you start talking about crystals and amethyst, and I get it. A diamond's a rock.
I collect minerals and I collect rocks too, but minerals and rocks. There's a difference. Minerals have very specific characteristics that in color and clarity and crystal formation. Rocks are a bunch of different minerals kind of mushed together. That's not a scientific explanation, but I collect them all, and they're beautiful, and in all kinds of different ways. So it's like collecting art. But the best part is sometimes I dig them out of the ground myself.
So
Sometimes I buy them, sometimes they're gifts. But yeah, I get them in all kinds of ways.
so you have 4 children.
Yes.
Are any of your rocks valuable than any or all of your children?
No, of course not.
Okay, I'm just checking.
Who would say that?
Well, I'm just you're the first person in my 57 years around this planet that I've met that actually collects rocks.
Well,
So
let me tell you something. Go online. There are hundreds of
no.
clubs and Facebook pages all about rocks.
Okay, for my audience, you're used to hearing this. This is one of those things you do not want to Google on your own phone, tablet, or computer. So if you're going to go, I just feel like in my browser history that me Googling rock collectors, I have enough going on. I have enough of these books that I've written notes in, front and back, just no white pages. I don't need a questionable browser history where I'm looking at rock groups.
Well, mine's pretty questionable then.
Let me see. So you already answered, where do you keep them? That was one of my questions. In a custom lidded cabinet.
But I also keep them all over my yard in Arizona. They're everywhere.
And I kind
They're
of
in every room.
I kind of reference this. If they're an honor or a punishment, are they in your will?
Yeah, well, yeah, they go to my one son. Not that anybody else wants them. Yeah, my one son will get them. Also, I have a grandson who's 6, and he started to go with us rocking. So, maybe my son will leave them to him. I don't know. And when I'm dead, they can do whatever they want with them. I won't care.
Let's see the next one. If someone throws a rock, even playfully, does that make you mad?
Not if they I catch it. That would be fine.
It was those 2 words that really got me. I was like,
Well, yeah.
I just, like I said, I've never heard of that. When you're young, you may have to do like a rock collection. I can't even think of that. I'm not even sure that was a thing in the 70s. I remember seeing rock collections, but I don't remember where. But even though I don't remember where, I will 100% positive that it was not someone that we knew at their house.
Well, I guarantee you, I have lived in 8 states, 8 or 9 states, and whenever, because with TV, I moved quite a bit, and I would call the local natural history museum and ask who the rock groups were, and I would join them.
So one of the things I left out earlier when I mentioned that you're a writer and you'd work with multiple publications, writing sports features and movie reviews, but one of the term that I left out because I wanted to reference this later was archaeological pieces. So
Yes.
so what is that? Did you focus on those because that you're a rocker? Oh my gosh, I can't believe I just used that term correctly.
Yeah. It's funny. It may, if I had more time, I was going to live, another 50 years. I go back to school and be an archaeologist. I'm fascinated with history. I'm fascinated with ancient history. And you're right. I have spent time digging around old mine sites yeah, I love that kind of stuff. So I did write some archaeological pieces, and I have written 2 of my 6 published books. 2 are historical fiction. So, and 1 is ancient historical fiction. So, yeah, I love that stuff.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you this because you said that you did some of this rock collecting at mines and things like that. Have you ever found any other, some reason I feel like I heard this once, that denim at mines, like they would find like old denim that was left or something. Have you ever found anything besides what you're focusing on rocks, but have you ever found anything peculiar or interesting?
I've been in old towns that were ghost towns, that or the bits and pieces of, mining sites where there were home and stuff, and then I brought some of that home on occasion. I like rust. Rust is kind of cool. I like old rusty things.
How often do you get to feed this need to go out or how do you even determine? Like, do you just see like this is just I've never thought of rocks like this. So to me, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So what is, you're outside somewhere. Do you ever just see a rock and go, oh, I got to have that?
Of course.
Okay.
That's the problem with rockers is we're always looking down. When my son and I go out and we're in beautiful places in Arizona, I have to periodically say, let's look up a little bit. Let's look up at the sun's beautiful, the sky's beautiful, the view is beautiful. We have to look up because we're always looking down. I think archaeologists have the same problem.
And as I still have your blog post up, looking down would prevent you because you want to be hit by falling space rock. You would never even see it coming.
Yeah, and part of me would want to see the space rock. I would want to see it. I'd go, oh, cool. Oh, shit.
Have you seen the guy from Pompeii that was crushed by a rock? And my personal feeling is that he probably died and fell because of the volcanic gases, and then but it basically landed right where his head was. So they found this big rock, and then underneath it's his skeleton. And I'm going to post it the day this comes out. I'm going to find that picture. I'm going to post it with this post as well, referencing this post because I always thought that was pretty funny.
I haven't seen. I traveled to Greece, and I was supposed to go to Pompeii. And the Pompeii workers were on strike, so I couldn't go. So I went to Herculaneum, which is the town just below Pompeii, which is just like Pompeii. It's got all the same kind of ruins and everything. It's like, the little neighborhood next door. But I did not see a guy hit with a giant rock. I would have remembered that.
I will find that, and I will post it the day that this comes out. But
thank you.
It's just so funny. But they find him, and when I saw that post, I immediately thought to this because it's always about the story. The way that you go out, if you're going to go out, tell a story. So, yeah.
Or at least have stories already collected.
I know.
Because when you're lying on your deathbed, I hope you can have memories that you go, yeah, that was really cool. I'm glad I did that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that I've told this many times on this podcast before, but I haven't told it to you. So, audience, deal with it. I have a jacket. We went to Disney World, and I had a jacket from a ride called Expedition Everest. It has all these patches on it. Looks very visual. It says Everest Summit Team. So often I get asked, and I also feel complimented at 56 that people are still asking me if I'm fit enough that I look like I could have climbed Everest, which I'm from Florida, so there's no way I would have even gotten near the mountain to begin with. Anyway, I usually say yes. Because I'm in passing, I won't see this person again. And that's a great, oh my God, I met someone that climbed Everest today. What? And then whatever. But one day I wore it to church, and one of the ushers came over, and we go to a big church. It has 22,000 members. An usher came over and they said, hey, your jacket, I just noticed that looks amazing. Oh, and they saw on the breast that said Everest Summit Team. They go, did you climb Everest? I go, no. They're like, oh, it would have been a better story if you would have said yes. And I thought that was funny. And they turned around and left. And when my wife said, why didn't you say yes? I go, because a church this size, I guarantee you there is someone that has climbed Everest, and it'll get back to them that I said I climbed Everest, and they're going to come over and talk to me, and they're going to find out I was lying. So I might as well it's all about the audience.
Yeah,
so
but stories don't count if they're not true.
Man,
I don't make up anything. And
Barney
don't.
Stinson and I'm not saying that you do. I'm saying Barney Stinson says that lies just ruin perfectly good stories. It's a perfectly good story until
it's funny. When I was a teacher, I would tell my students. I taught in a Title I school, which means the kids, most of them, lived in poverty, and they didn't know anything about anything beyond their block. And so I would tell them stories about places I'd gone and things I'd done, and most of them, they didn't believe me. And I said, you've got to go out and do things and take intelligent chances and conquer your fears, kind of things. And it's funny, behind my desk, it was a tough neighborhood. We had gangs, we had all kinds of problems. And big, tough kids would come up to me and try to intimidate me sometimes. And Ryan, my partner, took a photograph that I had, and it's me swimming with a Caribbean reef shark, about a 9-footer. And I was in the water with a dozen of them that day. And I'm looking straight at it. It's coming straight at me. And he had engraved on it, Miss Montgomery swims with sharks. And it's right behind my head as this kid's towering over me, trying to intimidate me. And he goes, is that you in that picture? I'm like, yes, it is. He said, okay. And he walked away.
Yeah.
And I'm like, sometimes stories are useful.
They are. Let's see. I did have a question that I wanted to ask you, and I should have asked you this earlier because we were talking a little bit about your journalism career. Because we had something that was breaking news that happened here in America recently as we're recording this. So I wanted to ask you, because you did a lot of live 2000 studio episodes, I guess studio episodes.
Live TV
broadcast. What was the biggest news, sports or non-sports, that came on? And the two that came to my mind, like for someone that's doing sports but having something else going on, was the World Series earthquake. I remember watching that live.
Yeah, I was at ESPN when that happened.
And then the Magic Johnson when it broke out.
That was huge. That was huge. I was working then too. That was huge. But back in those days, we didn't have a 24-hour news cycle, so it wasn't constantly repeating the same stuff. It was just we read a story and moved on. It's not like it is today. So yeah, there were stories like that. I remember the Magic Johnson stuck in my head. I was going to mention that one.
He was by far my favorite basketball player growing up. I mean, it's still today, if I was going to start an NBA team, would start with Magic Johnson. I'd work out from there.
Well, without Magic and without Larry Bird, there'd be no NBA.
No.
They saved it. I'm not sure enough people appreciate that, but they did save it. It was a sport that no one cared about, and then they came along and saved it. So
they did. And they took it just far enough that then people got sick of seeing the Lakers and the Celtics every year in the finals and were wishing for someone else to pop in there. And that's when Jordan came
Yeah,
around.
always.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it worked out well. But yeah, that was impactful to me, and I just remember those being and even though it was a baseball game going on, I remember the World Series because that was at a time where I don't really sit down and watch the World Series like I did as a kid or even as a young adult, but I remember watching that live as it happened, and it was so surreal to see what was going on.
Yeah, well, I have to be honest with you. When I was a sportscaster and I'm working, I didn't always see everything. And much of my information from news came from reading the newspaper. I still read a paper newspaper every day. And I read about stories almost more than I watched them. I know that seems strange
No, I mean, I would still prefer that as well. Yeah,
because you get more out of it. Now, I'm not saying I didn't see clips of things, but I didn't sit for hours and watch TV very often because I was working for my 3 minutes on TV.
right.
Right.
We briefly mentioned your novels earlier, and before we go, I wanted to mention the novels that I have. There's one, World War II history. I believe it's one of your most recent, if not your.
That is my most recent.
Okay,
That came out
Your
June
Forgotten
6th.
Sons.
Yeah, that came out June 6th, the 80th anniversary of D-Day. So it just launched.
Okay,
And yes, people might be surprised to know that I do not write about sports in my books. I write about societal issues or strange events. I mean, I've written about post-traumatic stress and sabotage, domestic terrorism on trains, and cults, religious cults that abuse children, all kinds of things, like strange things. And this book came to me a very weird way. My friend of 40 years called me up and said, I need you to go from Arizona to Baltimore. I have to have surgery, and it's very delicate, and I need you to be my healthcare power of attorney because her soldier husband, who'd done 3 tours, 2 in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, couldn't handle being in hospitals. He'd been in a hospital, his men were dying, and he freaks out in hospitals. So I had to go. She had a tumor wrapped around her spinal cord. And they said, she may wake up paralyzed from the waist down. So it was a very dicey situation. So the night before the surgery, she hands me a plastic bag, Ziploc bag, full of 75-year-old letters from World War II. And she said, no matter what happens to me, promise me you'll tell Bud's story. And of course, I wanted her to feel better. I said, of course I'll do it. Well, ultimately she walked out of the hospital. This operation was a success, but I'd made her this promise that I would write about her uncle Bud. Now, her mother had children like 20 years apart. So even though she's in her 60s, Bud, who would be 100 by now, would still have been her uncle. And he was in World War II in the Graves Registration Service. Do you know what that is?
I do not.
Those are the guys who locate, identify, and bury the dead. Now, you've probably never read anything about them or seen them in films because no one ever talks about them. But let's face it, Bud was at Normandy on D-Day, and 10,000 men on both the Allies and the German side died that day. 10,000 bodies just that day. So you've got the Allies were shipping 186,000 men through the Normandy beaches. You couldn't have all those bodies flying around, both for health reasons and for morale reasons. So the Graves registration guys are the ones that have to pick up all the parts. Think about that. So today in 36 foreign countries and territories, there are American cemeteries that were built by the Graves Registration Service during World War II. And Bud was one of those men. And I believe it was the most difficult job in the military, and we ignore it. When you read a book about World War II or you see a movie, we see planes fall from the sky, we see men shooting each other and dying, yet the page turns or the film goes to the next shot, and nobody says what happened to the bodies.
Yeah.
And that's what he did.
So did you have any notion of, had you ever heard of this group before you were handed these letters?
Nope, I didn't.
So how shocked did she tell you that's what he did, or did you not
learn? Yes, she did.
Okay.
She spent her life, she somehow felt a kinship with this man she never met. And the family didn't talk about it because it was apparently shameful to be in the Graves Registration Service. And she told me the stories that she knew. And then she said, write his story. And it turned out to be, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but it turned out to be very sad and hard. And I couldn't, his records were destroyed. 1973, the National Military Records Depository burned in St. Louis, and it destroyed 80% of the Army's military records of people that were discharged between, I think, 1912 and 1960. So Bud's records were destroyed. So how was I supposed to find out what he did and where he was? So I took the letters, and this was during COVID. So I was going to go to France. I couldn't go. So I wanted to kind of follow in his footsteps. And I had the postmarks from his letters. And the postmarks and the dates put him at Normandy, put him at the Battle of the Bulge, put him with Patton in Czechoslovakia, put him in Nuremberg. And I wasn't sure I could actually trust just where the postmarks were. And the other thing was I couldn't travel there. And as a writer, I need to see and smell and hear a story before I can write it. The good news for me is that I went to school in Luxembourg when I was in college. I spent 6 months there my junior year in college. And Luxembourg's right smack in the middle where the Battle of the Bulge was. And so I decided to put Bud in Luxembourg because I have very vivid memories of that world. And then after the book went to print, we found an obit that ran for Bud when he died, and it said he had been at Normandy, the Battle of the Bulge, and stationed in Luxembourg. So that was kind of serendipitous in a way. But yeah, I had to write his story, and it was heartbreaking. It's gruesome. It's necessarily gruesome when you consider what he had to do. And I was very fortunate that I found a book by a man who was a captain in the Graves Registration Service. It's called Crosses in the Wind, by James Schoeman, who went on to become a lieutenant colonel. And he wrote about his 2-year stint working in the Graves Registration Service and the horrible things his men did. And this was nonfiction, so this was real. So what I was able to do was to take Bud's letters and put him in some of the situations that Schoeman's men were in. So it is considered a fictional book, but it's inspired by a true story. So yeah. It was the most difficult book I've ever written.
How long did it take you from taking those letters in your hand to the finished product until you were done? Not till it hit the market, but how long did it take?
Till I was done?
Yes.
About I can usually, once I get the research, let me see, probably, I don't know, 9 months to a year.
So you've done both fiction and nonfiction.
No. Well, I wrote nonfiction as a reporter, you know, as stories. But no, all of my books are fiction, but they're based on stories or real people or real incidents. Like we had in Arizona, we had an Amtrak train that was derailed intentionally right after the Oklahoma City bombing, and they believe it was an act of domestic terrorism. It was deadly. A man died. A bunch of people, 100 people were injured out in the middle of the desert in the middle of the night. And that crime in 1995 remains a cold case. And I wrote about that.
Is that a light in the desert?
That's a light in the desert, yes. And I went out there and interviewed people, and there was this cult of these old people that followed a rainbow from Canada to that spot, and they were waiting for Jesus. That was fun. So what I do is I meet real people, and then I write fiction around it, but I use all the facts from the case. That's kind of, you know, I wrote about a cult, the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who are the polygamists, and their prophet had 80 wives and 200 children, and he married 12-year-olds. And this was going on while I was living in Arizona. They live in a place called Colorado City. And I went up there and pretended I didn't know where I was. That was the most scared I've ever been when I was up there researching that. So that's
so researching that was more terrifying to you than working as a teacher in a Title I school.
That could be terrifying at times too, but not like that. Yeah,
okay.
No, honestly, I didn't even take out my camera. I was going to take pictures up there, but I didn't. I mean, until maybe 10, 15 years before I went up there, they would stand guard with rifles at the road that went into their town. But when the government said you can't do that because you don't own the roads, they had to allow people to drive through. And these people, all the women wore like prairie dresses, you know, high-necked prairie dresses that went to the ground. There was no TV, no internet, no newspapers, no radios. Um, it was horrifying. It really was. And they're all descended from two men. So there's all kinds of birth defects, and it's a nightmare. And yeah, so after that research, I wrote about a 16-year-old girl who grew up there. Now she was fictional, but from all the research I did, she could have been real. So those are the kind of stories I do. I wrote one about Wolfcatcher is about, I was hired by a magazine to look into a man who was buried in they dug him up in 1939. An archaeologist found him, and he was buried with all these fabulous funerary objects about 10 miles outside of Flagstaff, Arizona. And they called him the magician. He was buried with swords, like wooden swords, and the Hopi that were there helping to dig him up said he was a sword swallower, and he was a magician, and he had crystals and weapons and 600 funerary objects. And in 1939, we dug people like that up and put them in museums. Of course, we don't do that anymore. It's totally culturally offensive. But I was hired to find out who he was. Might have been, because in the records the archaeologists wrote, they said he looked sort of Caucasian. Now, this man was buried in the 11th century in Arizona. How could he have looked sort of Caucasian?
Right.
So, yeah, so there's this story is how the reporter that goes up to try to find out who he was, and then the 11th century story when a volcano was erupting up there, and yeah, I got in all kinds of trouble doing that story. I hope he got mad at me. The archaeologist wouldn't talk to me. So yeah, that was a fun one.
So how do you take that then? If they're upset, I mean, do you just go, well, I'm still writing? I mean, you obviously did continue to write it, but what is your like? Why are you mad that I'm doing? Do you understand why
I didn't understand. I didn't understand originally. I'm a kid from New Jersey. I didn't understand much about Native Americans, but like Kate, the reporter in the book, she understands through what happens that she should be more respectful, that she should understand these things. I wrote, honestly, if you read the modern part of that story, that's exactly what happened, except the part where they're shooting at me, at Kate. But the rest of it really all happened. And then I put the magician's story together from what I learned about who he was and where he might have come from. So again, do I write about sports? No, I don't.
Have you ever thought about writing? Is there anything in the sports world or anything?
Not interested.
Not interested?
Really, no. I don't. Maybe because that was my life for so many years.
Yeah.
For 50 years of my life, sports were it. And I really enjoy writing about different kinds of things, like so.
Okay. Annie Montgomery, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I
enjoyed it.
I very much enjoy. I mean, like I said, the rock collecting. I was beside myself because I kept going. My wife was like, shut up already. Because I was just like, where does she keep them? She goes, ask her. And I'm like, and who gets them afterward? And she kept going, ask her. She was just beside herself.
Well, tell her. I keep them wherever I can. And they will go to my one son.
I know. Well, now I don't. It's weird. I remember, as maybe a child or something that I would see it.
Everybody picked up rocks as a kid.
Yeah.
I just never stopped.
Yeah. And I did. I was trying to think of when the last time I saw like a rock that made me like, oh, look at that. Or, I mean, I don't know. I can't even think of that. So I was very interested in asking those questions. So thank you very much for answering those questions. I appreciate it.
Anytime.
Okay. So your most recent book, which was released in June of 2024, Your Forgotten Sons, where can people go out to find that?
They can find it anywhere. And if they want to go to my website, which is AnnMontgomeryWriter.com, that's Ann with an E, AnnMontgomeryWriter.com, there are all the little buttons that you can push to go wherever you buy books.
Yes, and you can find out in your blog. That's where I found your blog as well. For everyone that follows the Stone Genius on Instagram, all of Annie's information and links will be there as well. And so that they know, because I don't think I referenced this, I've been calling you Annie, and when you just said Ann, I have not been mispronouncing your name this whole time.
No, you haven't. It's spelled A-N-N-E. But as I explained to you before, I'm a redheaded, freckled person, and everybody but my snobbish mother has called me Annie.
Okay.
So Annie, it is, but it's spelled A-N-N-E.
I just, it's not beyond me to mispronounce someone's name. I just wanted them to know in this particular instance, I was not doing that.
No, you weren't.
Okay. Thank you so much. Let me ask one last question here. What's next for you? What's on the horizon? Do you have another book that is in your mind that's formulating pen to paper already, or if you even do pen to paper anymore? What's next for you?
Right. Actually, I am kind of required for a year from the launch date of Your Forgotten Sons of promoting that book.
Okay.
So I have a couple of events to do in Indiana. I have a couple of events to do in Georgia, and it's my job to do that. I don't have a book currently in my head. I hope to have one, but they kind of just come to you. So at the moment, I don't have anything. I write a blog, and again, I'm in St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and I get to stare at the Caribbean every day, so I don't feel like doing much.
Yeah, I don't blame you. And your blog is very enjoyable. I enjoyed your last 3 posts are the ones that I was and they all kind of tied into what I was going to talk about. It actually we didn't even talk about. I did very much enjoy the tackling lionfish one earring at a time. I will tell you, that's one thing that I'm not good at, is like getting catchy little titles or anything. And that did. I was
I'll tell you the trick. The trick is you write the story first and then do the title.
Ah, okay.
You have a working title.
Because the title made me, I was like, what is one? Because I thought I actually thought the word was wrong. I thought I was reading it wrong. I thought like maybe she mean one herring at a time. I don't know. I didn't understand, and so it actually made me read it. And then I was like, oh, that's an amazing story. So I very much enjoyed your blog as well, which once again, Ann Montgomery, Ann with an E, AnnMontgomeryWriter.com. You can find all that. The links will be at the Instagram page as well. Okay. Thank you so much again. Everyone else, Annie Montgomery, she is a sports journalist. She is a former amateur referee in all the major sports, with football and baseball being her favorite, which if I was going to be a referee, I think those would be my 2 favorites as well. So thank you so much again for being on the program.
You're welcome. And don't forget, I am a rocker.
Oh, my God. See, and I was trying to, I don't know how I was, I don't know. I don't know how I can deal with that. I don't know how I'm going to deal with that word. I just think it's funny, rocker. I mean, it makes total sense, but it's just like, I don't know. I feel like I'm not going to say like a nerd club, but I feel like I'm like me saying that and knowing exactly what I mean when I say that. I was okay when I would say rocker and I was referencing, what's his name? Because
I know.
now I'm totally drawing a blank on what's his name in Phoenix. Because it is the rocker. Jeez, I mentioned him earlier.
Now you got me doing it.
I know.
All right, we're old. Okay.
I know, and it's sad when you can sing the song like
Alice Cooper.
Yes, Alice Cooper. So my daughter, or my oldest, and I were playing golf at Rancho Mañana, North Scottsdale, and we were in the clubhouse, and I go, "Hey, that's Alice Cooper over there. He's a big golfer." This is many years ago, and she goes, "Who's Alice Cooper?" And I said, "He's a rocker." And see, this is what's throwing me off and why I think of him. I go, "He's a rocker." She goes, "I don't know who he is." I go, "Did you see Wayne's World?" Oh, she goes, "I remember him from Wayne's World." I was like, no, that's not. But so now I have to fully, now that I say rocker, I have
Embrace
2 things.
Just embrace it.
I will do my best for that. Thank you again for being on.
Right.
I'm sure I will come up with more questions for a rocker, because I don't see how I won't after this is done. So I appreciate that. Everyone else, you guys have been listening to the Stone Genius podcast. My name's Ro. We've had Annie Montgomery on today. Thank you again for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Everyone else, we'll talk to y'all later. Bye.